Once at lunch, a man approached Vishwanathan Anand, the Indian chess grandmaster, and presented him with a 3 by 3 chessboard filled with 10-11 pieces. It was supposedly an end game from the early 1900s or perhaps even the late 1800s. Anand glanced at it briefly and within seconds identified the game, recalling exactly how it played out. You see, when you immerse yourself in something, hearing, listening, and observing it regularly, you become a grand master of it. That was the beauty of Vishwanathan Anand. In today's episode, we are going to explore what makes you beautiful in your own unique way. Hello, everyone. My name is Aaditya Mehta, and you are listening to the podcast on personality development. With us today is someone who truly believes that who we are is the precursor to why we do what we do. He is an entrepreneur, an inventor, and an inspiring individual. David Ask. As I bring him on the show, take a moment to enjoy this intro music. And if you haven't already, please follow this podcast. It's free for you, but it helps us reach more people who can benefit from the incredible wisdom shared by our amazing guests. Now, without any further delay, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to podcast on personality development. In today's episode, as I've already mentioned, we have the amazing guy who has a lot of wisdom about how you are beautiful. So please allow me to welcome David Ask. Hey, Dave, what's up? How are you doing?
Hey, thank you so much for having me on today and for the very kind introduction.
Wonderful. David, I know what I gave was a very short and crisp introduction. And as I always say this, it seems like a more of a Instagram profile picture kind of introduction. Everyone likes the picture, but they don't know the backstory of that picture, right? So if you can give a brief introduction about yourself, that would be just great.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, I'm my name is David Osk, and I'm it's funny you mentioned, being an entrepreneur. I kind of fit that bill, rather well, but a bit of a backstory, like you mentioned. I grew up in the great state of Minnesota and have been now living in Nashville, Tennessee for quite a while, for several decades.
Mm.
And my wife Lisa and I have been married for 25 years. We have two children. My son is 19, my daughter is 17, and yeah, it's interesting. I run my own company based around an invention. So a while back, my brother-in-law and I actually started the company. I ended up buying him out, but we invented a thermostat cover, like a guard that goes over a thermostat so people don't tamper with it. But we were the first ones in the world to have a stat guard with a combination lock. So we
Mm.
sell in several thousand retail stores and online and so on. And I'm pretty passionate about not only my company and so on, but about really people development. And a few years ago, I met a clinical psychologist, a guy named Dr. Andy Garrett, who's in my mastermind group, and he really helped me to put some language to some things that I kind of knew was there in each of us. And yeah, so my mission now is really a lot about people development.
Wow. That's where we definitely relate with each other because this podcast is started for people's development and you are on it. So it's a perfect match, I would say. Made by Pod Match. Wow.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
David, it's really interesting that you gave your introduction, and in your introduction, you mentioned about people's development. And today we are going to talk about how people are beautiful in their own way. It's a pretty unique topic, I would say. Like we always say people are unique, but that
Yeah.
uniqueness makes them beautiful, and that's what we are going to talk about. Uh, tell me something, like tell me the initial thought process which you have related to the uniqueness of the people, because most of the times people don't know what their unique style is, and it
Yeah.
takes like several of years to actually find out that, oh, I can do this easily, no one can actually do that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
uh if you have your initial thoughts on that, I would really like to hear that.
Sure, yeah. So it's kind of a wide, kind of a swath to paint this picture, but I'll back into it this way. Our mission in life, right? Everybody kind of gets up in the morning,
Mm,
with this idea of, hey, I want to matter, right? I want to
right.
to live a life of significance, a life of impact on other people.
Mm,
And quite often, we have a kind of a generic or vague understanding of who we are and what type of an impact that we want to have. But it's this idea of impact that really gives us the ability to have a sense of fulfillment in our
mm,
lives.
mm,
When we see, I forget who originally kind of coined the term the dent in the universe. When we get to see, I'll just use my name here, the David Osk shaped dent, in someone, right? Whether that's my wife or kids or friends or anybody, that sense of fulfillment then, really kind of bounces back to us. We get to see, our unique, impact on somebody. But what I think is fascinating is quite often we have, like I said, a generic understanding of how we should operate and what we should do. And it's, really this idea of, well, be nice, be helpful, don't be mean, and just be nice.
mm,
And I think it gets a lot better than that. So, I work closely with a psychologist friend of mine, Dr. Andy Garrett, and of course, we really help people dial in, on words like
mm,
authenticity and identity. And then in order, when you've established that, your why starts to become kind of front and center. But then also, there's a couple of words that I like to drive home. And of course, one of them is tied to the book that I'm working on, this idea of resilience and grit. What are the difference between authenticity and identity? What's the difference between resilience and grit? And how are those things generated, if you will,
mm,
from your internal compass, your internal guide,
right.
as opposed to, hey, I want to make my parents happy, or I don't want to, be embarrassed, or I want to become somebody, or at least not be a nobody, that kind of thing, where these extrinsic types of motivations. So yeah, we really help people to well, I'll put it this way: we ask the right questions in the right sequence so that people really have an understanding of, who they are and how they can have a really unique, impact on the world and where their motivations really come from.
Wow, that's wonderfully explained. About grit and resilience, and to become something. Always everyone wants that. I would say most of it, not everyone though. But like if everyone wants to have that sort of purpose in life where they want to achieve something. Uh, but again, the question over here is that how can one recognize their true unique self? Okay, because you see that it took me around 26 years, I would say. Like when I was 26 years of age, I really came to know that, what, speaking is something which easily comes to me, and I'm very passionate about it. Okay, and today, as I know that, I can do something which most people, can do it, but it's difficult for them, and it comes very easily to me. Okay,
Mhm.
in a similar way, there are many people like the story which I mentioned before, actually introducing you, was of Vishwanathan Anand sir, who is the Grandmaster of chess in India, and all around the world as well. So even, he might have recognized his talent somewhere at a very young age, and he's at a very good place now. So how can people, even parents for their children, and even a grown-up adults like me, can actually identify where is it that I'm unique, and how is it I matter, okay, and what I can do to actually make a difference.
No, such great questions. So, I'll start with, like the word authenticity. What
Hmm.
does it mean to be authentic? Well, you really have to identify, what is, I mean, most true about you, those things, the hierarchy of things that rise to the top. And of course, so what is it that makes up a person? We're
Hmm.
not animals, right? We have
Hmm.
we have a mind, a body, and a spirit, and we
Yeah.
can literally think about our own thinking, and heck, we
Hmm.
can think about thinking about our own thinking. I mean, we it's amazing what our consciousness, does for us and helps us to accomplish. So, the word authenticity comes from the word author.
Hmm.
Like I didn't make me, right? I didn't choose my eye color. I didn't choose where I was born. I didn't choose my taste buds. And,
Hmm.
largely, we don't even really choose our personalities. We
Hmm.
get to choose what we do, with all of those things.
Yeah.
And so what's fascinating, if you get back to, children who are, maybe 0 to 5 or 6, they're not thinking about being authentic like we are, right?
Hmm.
They're just being themselves. I mean, they're
Hmm.
literally choosing the things that come very naturally to them.
Hmm.
And it's fascinating because once life happens and things get difficult or you get insulted or teased or something like that, then you start to question all of those things inside of you,
Hmm.
and which is part of a normal life. But I like to say that our identity really is just literally writing down and identifying those things that make us unique. So back to the question, what is it that makes a person, right?
Hmm.
Well, the internal uh, in the English language anyway, the internal descriptions would be things like your values, right? What do
Hmm.
you value? What does your we use the term core values a lot, right? What does your core
Yeah.
happen to value the most?
Hmm.
And then we start to dive into things like convictions, which is different than a value. A conviction,
Yeah.
is what do you believe is right or wrong? And,
Hmm.
a value really is this idea of, we're holding up a matrix of things that we value in order to make decisions kind of through that lens. It helps us make better decisions, right? If an opportunity or an obstacle come up, we've identified, hey, I know I've kind of predetermined what I'm going to do based upon what I really believe, is valuable to me.
Hmm.
But then, you get into, you've got values, convictions, and then virtues are kind of outward focused. What is it that this um, type of an impact that I want to have on somebody else?
Right.
And then you kind of move on to there and things get a little bit, maybe the word is more complex, but I like to say, what is it that gives you goosebumps, right? What is it
Uh,
that puts that beautiful lump in your throat, that when you're
hmm.
doing it or saying it or experiencing it, just really, makes you come alive. There's that
Yeah.
portion of you that seems transcendent and, like, wow, that was powerful, or that was beautiful.
Hmm.
And what I think is fascinating is when we allow, it takes courage to do this, but when we allow ourselves to let the goosebumps, as it were, inform our values, convictions and virtues, we tend to operate at a much higher level and with a real sense of self, direction, as opposed to, people pleasing or not wanting to be embarrassed or giving into fear and things like that. And
Hmm.
what I think is fascinating is so one of the things that Dr. Andy, kind of introduced to me early on, um, and again, we walk people through all of this stuff, basically asking them the right questions so that they can identify, those things that are most powerful and beautiful and courageous and impactful about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a fingerprint and a retina that's different, and our souls have got a different print on it. We're very unique. I mean, there's obvious overlap because we're humans,
Hmm.
but when you start identifying those characteristics that rise to the top, it's very, very, nuanced and very different. So I
Hmm.
like to say, how do you know you found it? And how do you
Hmm.
know that you haven't? And
Hmm.
what I think is really fascinating is, we use the word, so actually I'm going to back into it this way. when you're not operating, inside of your unique characteristics, again, convictions, values, virtues, goosebumps,
Hmm.
you're probably going to have a lot of social anxiety. You show
Yeah.
up in a room full of people or a job interview or whatever it is, and there's kind of a question mark inside of you. You're basically playing a role, trying not to, maybe feel the displeasure of someone else.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of anxiety that rises up. Sometimes, if you haven't really lasered in on that, you're going to experience maybe even depression, or you might be a procrastinator, you might be apathetic or avoidant of certain people and situations. You might be feeling stuck, like, man, who am I? And what the heck am I even getting up in the morning for?
Yeah.
You're going to experience a lot of unfulfilled or unfulfilling duties and relationships.
Hmm.
So on the flip side, then how do that you're operating out of that, that most authentic space inside of you? Well, you start to feel genuine. You start to
Hmm.
feel more natural in your own skin. You're more courageous and compassionate and resilient and free. You have clarity of, who you are and what your purpose is. You're guided by those internal standards. And something else too is you have a much higher sense of confidence and self-worth. You're committing to those things that are, really, they mean a lot to you, and
Right.
you don't feel like you're trying so hard.
Hmm.
Just kind of a sense of peace of mind and so on, tend to take over. And then, of course, something else that's near and dear to my heart lately is this idea of, grit, meaning you're going to do something difficult because it's worth it to you.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, I was completely resonating it with my own story, I would say. I mean, uh, when I started teaching to students, I previously had this social anxiety in me. I mean,
Sure.
it was really difficult to talk to people. Uh, but when I started teaching, I sort of went out of the way and tried really hard to get connected with them. And later on, I realized that when I saw these amazing movies, like Super 30 is a movie based on a teacher, and then there is one Tamil movie which I saw in Hindi dubbed and which was known as Sir, that is
Mhm.
SIR Sir. And then I watched one another movie from United States, and it had Matthew Perry as a lead actor and as a teacher in that. I forgot its name.
Okay.
But when I see all these movies, I literally started getting those goosebumps that
Yeah.
what I really want to add values in the life of the students one way or the other.
Mm.
And when they achieve something, okay, it feels such great pleasure. So that's how the podcasting thing came into my mind, and it's working really really well. So I completely resonate with each and every word you said. Now coming back to this interview, of course, I usually share my stories, so that people can relate with me, and I hope they do.
Sure.
So coming back to this, when you say about asking the right questions, uh, and I have saw your profile as well, and you always mention about asking the right questions. Generally, what are those questions which a person should ask himself or herself? Okay. And also there is one amazing line written in your profile that who we are is a precursor uh, to why we do what we do. So how did that came up?
Right. Yeah. So I'll start with the latter here. So this idea of getting up in the morning and having a why, like I'm going to get up. In fact, I'm getting up early because, I know why I'm getting up and it means a lot to me.
Hmm.
Well, what I think is fascinating is if you don't start with who, if you don't start with your own, bedrock, right? Those
Hmm.
internal standards and so on, your why might not be your why. Your why might be someone that you respect. It might be your dad's, right? Or it could be just, I mean, it might be your teachers. It might be, not that you can't care about, something that someone else cares about and so on. But what I think is fascinating is when you've done the internal, work and you've answered those right questions, well, then your why really starts to take on,
Hmm.
more of it starts to look like you. It starts to feel natural to you, and you feel like, man, I'm willing to be passionate, around something because it really means something to me. By the way, that word passion comes from, I think comes from the Latin word to suffer, meaning I'm willing to suffer for something because it means so much to me. And I think you get that as a teacher, right? It's not easy. You're dealing with all
Not
types
easy.
of, personalities and conflict and,
Yeah.
all kinds of things, but you're willing to suffer, for those students because you know what's on the other side of,
Mm.
causing them to rise into a certain, headspace or ability. It makes their life better, and that means a lot to you, obviously.
Right, right. That's wonderfully said. I mean, what is something which is very important? And I sorry, why is something which is very important. Sometimes I just, think a lot about what you said, and sometimes, it just happens.
Yeah.
But it's really amazing that you mentioned that, and you also mentioned about the word passion, that it means to suffer. And this is something brand new information which I am getting on this show right now, and I'm sure the audience is getting, I'm sure this is a completely new information for them as well. So, congratulations to that. You actually made us learn something new today.
Well,
Of
and
course.
again, I don't have anything necessarily original. I like this idea of, standing on the shoulders of those who've gone before us. And
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by a lot of wise people that, have helped me kind of understand some things. Of course, I might explain it, a bit uniquely and so on. Your question about, how do you those right questions?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Some of it is actually a little complex.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Dr. Andy as a psychologist has really, helped people, to be able to look, inward, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
and start identifying some of those things. But on a basic level, I'll use an example. For instance, core values. We often, you'll walk into, a business, or maybe it's, the company you're working for, and they might even have, hey, these are our company's core values. They'll put them on the wall so everybody can see them, or they'll even maybe write a credo or a motto, or some type of a sentence like, hey, people like us do things like this. And I think those things
Mm.
are absolutely vital even at a corporate level. But
Right.
what I think is really fascinating is again, in the English language, and again, people would have to do this in their own language, but there's maybe 80 or so potential core values. And of course they have some overlap. But
Mm.
what's really fascinating is if you, sit a group of people down, and we do this all the time, and you say, hey, put a check mark next to, the particular core values that kind of jump out at you.
Mm.
And then you ask them to, let's narrow that down to 20. Now narrow that down to 10. Now narrow that down to 5, and put those in a priority level, right? Which is number one, two, three, four, five, or six. And what's really neat is, everybody's answer is different.
Yeah.
And, those top 5 are, really describe, the things about you that are really, really important. It's that plumb line. It's that the place that you've kind of at that point predetermined. These are those things that are valuable to me. One of the things that we do that, maybe take it a step further is we actually ask people to define those words. Put the meaning of that word in your own language, because I don't want to tell someone else what to think, right? they're
Mm.
they're not going to have ownership if you tell them what they should think. So when you even define the word and then write out, why is this important to me,
Yeah.
it really starts to galvanize that plumb line inside of you, that the thing that, for instance, we use the term course correcting quite a bit.
Mm.
Like an airplane takes off, and he's flying to whatever country or state or whatever it is, city. Most of the time, that airplane is not on course. In fact, I think it's 95% of the time it's just off course a little bit, and it's constantly course correcting based upon wind and pressure and everything else. But the same thing is kind of true for us. If we don't have predetermined coordinates, right? As it were, like written down. Well, how do you know what you're course correcting to? How do you know if, I mean, you might just be going from one ditch, on the other side of the road to the next. And, for someone to want to have a life that is consistent and feels natural and impactful, you have to understand what are those big rocks that I'm standing on to base my decisions upon.
Hmm. That's really well explained, and I love the analogy which you mentioned over there about. And honestly, I didn't knew about it, so thank you so much for saying that out loud.
Yeah,
Because I definitely didn't knew about that. Next time I fly, I'm going to fly. I'm definitely going to check that.
that's
Anyways,
right. Yeah.
but it was really well explained, and I love when someone gives that analogies to explain a certain thing, and that's really well said. However, you see that the follow-up question would be over here that, let's say, if we are going, and if we are still course correcting after these questions, does it ever happen that sometimes we have selected the wrong questions, and now it needs the whole build over starting from zero, or resetting the entire thing? That Does it ever happen? I mean,
You
does
know, I,
has
I,
it ever
I
happened with
guess,
you?
well, I guess that's possible. Here's what I think is fascinating is, of all the potential core values, we all possess all of them, right? I mean, it's not like
Hmm,
we don't have the rest, but
hmm,
it's again, it's just those top ones that are really, important to us uniquely. So, I guess, you wouldn't necessarily want to do these types of assessments if you're in a really bad place, right? If you're going
hmm,
through a divorce or you're having a really hard time personally or you're sick or I can see where you know depending on your stress level, you
hmm,
might be choosing some things that you might not normally choose, but in
hmm.
general I don't think that's something to worry about.
Wonderfully said. Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that out, because, audience, I would like to tell you this, that it is really important that you are in a really good frame of mind before doing this assessment. And just one more follow-up question, Dave, over here. Can you specify some of the examples of those questions so that our listeners can actually try that at home?
Yeah, so I think something that's, again, the program that we have is, typically would take someone working, for maybe a couple of months to
Mm-hmm.
really identify these things. But one of the little simple things, and I'll kind of let you peek behind the curtain, as it were, is, and this is not necessarily a new thing, but Dr. Andy kind of does it in a different way. But it's, for instance, we call it the eulogy exercise. So meaning when you pass away and you have a funeral, what would you want people to say about you? So if your parents or children or your friends or you know people that would attend your funeral, what would you really desire for them to
Mm-hmm.
say about you? And it's really fascinating how your values, right, start rising to the top in a letter like that. So if you had to write your own, say, dream scenario eulogy, and what would you want? And here's what I think is fascinating. If in my case, right, I'm a husband, but I also have a son and a daughter, and they're all different,
Right.
and my desired impact on them, I think, would be largely the same. But at the same time, I think there's some nuance there for each of them. So that exercise, for instance, what would I want, my daughter Catherine to say about me? What would I want my son Parker to say about me? What would I want Lisa, my wife, to say about me? And what's really, really neat is when you start to, distill, those really it's like you're distilling emotions, but distilling those into kind of actionable, words and so on. It's amazing how different, that those things might be, how nuanced they might be. And so I think it's really important to go through these exercises because you're basically describing the truest, and you use the word at the beginning, which I love, the most beautiful version of yourself.
Yeah.
And so when you're struggling, when you're getting off course, you can literally go back to these documents And again, I do this on a almost a daily basis because
Wow.
depending on, if I sleep, I kind of forget. We're very human,
Yeah.
and it's natural to, you sleep, you kind of forget what happened the day before, the week before, the month before, and life starts to happen, and stress comes in and all this kind of stuff. And we tend to drift away from the things that are most important to us.
Mm,
And then we start, or we maybe stop losing fulfillment or
mm,
start losing fulfillment in, the things that we want to be about. And so I
mm,
think it's really important. This is not a one-time exercise. These are
mm,
things that you identify, but then you emblazon them on your heart and on your psyche
right.
and in front of your eyes on a very regular basis to remind yourself, wait a second, I'm getting kind of stressed out today, or I'm tired, or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
but this is who I am. This is the type of man I want to be.
Wow, that's wonderfully explained, and I'm sure audience, if you want to get connected with him, I'm sure all the links are mentioned in the description. You are just a click away from him. Okay, so make sure to connect with him and get that set of questions. I'm sure he'll be giving you that, and he'll be giving you some amazing wisdom as well. But for now, it's time for a community question. So, Dave, let me explain you this. What's a community question?
Yeah,
We have a small WhatsApp community, and in that, all the listeners who feel like they are a family, they come over and they ask questions to the experts, and I'll ask them on behalf of them. I mean, I'll ask the expert on behalf of them.
sure.
Now, so this is how the community goes. So there is one girl, Shruti Gupta from the community, and she has written this question that I am a programmer by profession, okay, and I've just completed my second year of degree program, and now I want to become a designer and not a programmer. I feel that I'm a good programmer, but my true passion lies in designing.
Hmm.
What do you think I can do? And can you please also say something about my parents? Because something to my parents, because once I'm really afraid to tell them that I want to switch my career into designing. That's a wonderful question, Shruti. Thank you so much for asking with
Man,
so much of details, right? So,
boy, you're
Dave.
really throwing a heavy one at me here. Um, so, okay, there's a lot, of course, that would go into, a situation like that. And I know that, your country is not much different than ours. Parents have, expectations of their children. And of course, parents understand, man, they're sometimes to make a living, right? To pay your bills and things like that. It's not easy.
Right.
And we don't live in, a utopia where everybody gets to do everything they've ever dreamed of. It's that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I think it's really important to distinguish between, this idea of a human doing and a human being. Meaning, if someone, meets, Miss Gupta here, you said, at a
Hmm.
party and say, hey, Miss Gupta, what, who are you? Right? Is most people respond, I I am a programmer, right? I am a doctor. I am a lawyer. I am a tree trimmer. I am a, ditch digger, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's not who you are, right? I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, Miss Gupta is, if she wants, her parents and everybody else wants, they wanted her to be a programmer. She obviously has competence,
Hmm.
in this area. But
Hmm.
guess what? Even if she was a designer, as a, for a living, she's not a designer. That's not who you are. That's what you do for a living. But what I think she's really saying here is I want to express, those goosebumps inside of me. I want to
Right.
I want to do something on a more regular basis,
Hmm.
that would allow me to express the beautiful side of me, the creative side of me.
Hmm.
She, for someone to be a designer, she wants to create beautiful spaces for people to be in, and that means a lot to her. I'm assuming it's interior design or something like that.
Yeah, she
Unless
she
it's
wants to become a graphic designer.
graphic designer, right?
Mm,
Yeah, I want to, grab attention, for people's imaginations around, what's possible and this and that.
mm,
So, again, some of those family circumstances are hard to navigate,
mm,
but I think it's wise, again, to stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us, meaning, hey, her parents obviously love her, and
yeah,
and they want her to be able to stand on her own 2 feet, when she leaves the house and be able to pay her bills, so they don't have to support her anymore, right? She
yeah,
needs to be an adult. But that doesn't mean that she can't, explore graphic design on the side and, of course, move into that role where she feels like she's able to express the more personal and deeper aspects of who she is.
right.
Um, what I think is fascinating too is, depending on where we are in life, and of course, your country and mine, we're filled, with people who have a really hard time just, making a living or even finding clean water for that matter.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what I think is fascinating is it's not like those people aren't, human, or they don't can't exist. I mean, depending on what your occupation is, you can still have a desired impact on people around you.
Mm,
It might be different if, like, heck, after COVID, people are literally working at home in front of a computer by themselves all day. And
mm,
that would not be my definition of success. I would lose my mind if I didn't have, personal interaction, with
yeah.
people. But I think it's really important to distinguish, who we are is not what we do for a living. And you can
Mm,
actually really have a wonderful impact, on people around you, even if your career of choice isn't something that just totally lights you up. I would encourage, of course, heading in that direction,
mm,
but at the same time, we are, we're put into a space, time, and history where, there might only be certain jobs in your area that, where you can
mm,
pay the bills. So I don't want to
mm,
paint this picture that you get to do anything and be anything you want
yeah.
all the time. I think some people may have the luxury of doing that depending on where you are in the world, but that does not mean that you can't
Mm,
have a beautiful, creative impact on those around you,
mm.
even still.
Wow, that's wonderfully said. And Shruti, that's a very practical advice for you. And I really, really hope that that answer satisfies you. If it doesn't, you can always get connected to him. I mean, I'm sure all you have to do is mention that you have heard him on Personality Development Podcast to get that priority reply. I'm sure, Dave, it's fine, right? I mean,
Sure, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, obviously you have my contact information in the show notes there, and I'm happy to help anybody that I can.
Wonderfully said. So, Shruti, all you got to do is get connected with him, and I'm sure he'll be very happy to help you out. And all the other members who are listening to this podcast, if you haven't joined the WhatsApp community, come on, be a part of the community, be a part of a family, so that you can also ask questions to the experts who come on this show. I mean, this is your show also, so please come aboard, and we'll have fun on that community. With that being said, Dave, this is going to be my last question for sure. I promise that.
Yeah,
uh,
that's
if
okay.
if people wants to really know more about the program, know more about you, and wants to get connected with you, of course, before that, wants to go through your website or profile or everything else, how can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, so I'm writing a book right now, and I'm launching a community. It's really more for dads, for fathers. I'm really passionate about fatherhood. And if you go to guardiansofgrit.com, you can actually click reserve my spot, and then we'll be in touch when we launch that community. But I'm really excited to, to help, not only fathers, but really anybody, but at this point, really, men, understand that intrinsically motivating, plumb line inside of them, so that they can actually, help their children do the same thing, because you can't give away something you don't have. So if you
Hmm.
don't understand these things for yourself, good luck when it comes to raising, your children to do hard things, and to laser in.
That's wonderfully said. So, all the fathers fathers out there, you know, you where to go. So I'll mention the link in the description. All you got to do is just click on it. That's the entire hard work which you have to do. So make sure to click on those links and get connected with David Ask, and you can literally ask him anything. How is
That's
that?
right. Sounds good.
So, wonderful. Thank you, David, for being a part of the show. I really, really appreciate it. You taking out your valuable time. So, any lasting words which you would like to say to all the listeners out there?
Yeah. I'm going to leave you with a quote that really sums up what I'm doing here. It's by Benjamin Disraeli, and he said, "The greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own." And I
Hmm.
love the idea of looking at someone else and pointing out their riches. It's like you're holding up a mirror to someone and saying, "Hey, do you see what I see?
Hmm.
You're made of something awesome here, and I want to get behind that and help you develop that."
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dave, for saying that. I really appreciate that. And all the listeners out there, you heard what Dave said. So, what you can do is you can actually share this episode with your friends and all the loved ones, and this might actually show them a mirror of how beautiful they are, right? So make sure to send this, share with your loved ones. And this is Aditya Mehta signing off with David Ask from this episode. See you in the next one. Till then, peace